Our guest today, Mark Borges, is one of those people that doesn't need an introduction. He's had his hand in more corporate disclosures than pretty much anyone out there. Also, having blogged about disclosure, particular executive pay disclosures on compensationstandards.com for 17 years. He's a principal at Compensia. We're going to talk about the art of disclosure today on realtransparentdisclosure.com. So, Mark, I always like to tell people, and I'm sure you've heard me say this before about you, but it was 2005. We were at the Proxy Disclosure Conference, and I think it was the Mets and the Yankees were in the World Series, and we're, in the hallway, and the game was on, and we got to talking about blogging, which I'd just been blogging 3 years, and still people didn't know what that was. And I'm like, hey, do you think you want to blog? And I didn't even know really how to blog myself. But you started blogging and you are truly the naturally born blogger. You were amazing. I know you've slowed down in recent years, but you blogged for 17 years, which is an incredible achievement because you really got into a company's proxy disclosures and gave full analysis, unlike anyone has ever done. And there's no law firm now knows doing what you were doing or anything we ever did at the corporatecounsel.net or compensation standards. So just for those of you who might be younger and not have seen Mark's blogs over the years, and I'm sure many of you watching this have, I want to thank you for all the work you put into that because it was tremendous work, but also sharing with us your analytical abilities and your ability to put that to paper truly is amazing. So thank you.
Well, Brock, that's very kind to you. There are two things I'd like to say at the outset. And the first one, interestingly enough, is to kind of my own thank you to you for introducing me to blogging. It's funny, but I vividly remember our meeting in 2005 where we talked about it, and the concept intrigued me, and I really enjoyed having the opportunity. I was looking at these documents anyhow. And I thought that, as you indicated, being able to share or point out what people were doing, particularly where they had come up with some creative idea or technique for how to present information would be useful. And I really enjoyed it, which is item number one. Number two is, and I'll give you the scoop, I'm actually restarting the blog.
Ooh.
Um, you know, after however many years it was, I felt like there wasn't really much new to say that I hadn't already said, and I was seeing the same things. So I've been on hiatus now for several years, but when I look at disclosures today, they're completely different than they were back then. Companies have really gotten into doing a much better job of disclosure. And almost every time I read a proxy statement, I see something I'd never seen before, or I've seen a presentation with graphics that seem to be very effective. And I thought, gee, I've got something I can talk about now that isn't just repeating the same old thing that I said before. And then, of course, the other thing is that there are a couple new disclosure requirements that weren't around 4 or 5 years ago, such as the pay for performance disclosure, and then the recent decision about having to disclose your compensation recovery analyses. So I've been spending time sort of gathering information on those, and hopefully this week I'm going to start sharing that with people. Probably not as frequently as what I did before, but I still think there are things out there that are interesting and useful, particularly as I continue to help companies with disclosures. And if I see something that's done better than what I did, I like to borrow it, and I don't mind sharing it with others.
Well, that gets into my first question is what is your typical process when drafting disclosure to improve it? It sounds like borrowing disclosure sometimes is one of those things.
It is. It's funny. When I talk to people here at Compensia, I have a very sort of organized list of things that I do. First thing I do is I look at their SEC filings for the prior year to find out what activity has taken place in the compensation area that is was disclosed on an 8K or that will need to be explained perhaps more completely in the CD&A. So I want to make sure that everything that I think is important is being covered, particularly if the company is doing the initial draft and then I'm picking up on that. I also try to take a look at the proxy advisory firm reports for the last year to see what comments they got from ISS and Glass Lewis and if they have any information or anything that might be helpful in drafting the disclosure. Obviously, the third thing I look at is their say on pay results. If they're in the 90th percentile or above, then we're sort of free and clear. If they are less than what the significant opposition thresholds are for Glass Lewis and ISS, then I know that we're going to have something in the disclosure that addresses the response that the company had to that particular determination, because the proxy advisory firms are going to be looking for that, which, as you know, is the whole purpose behind this is making sure that there's a dialogue between a company and shareholders about their executive compensation program. And that's the most obvious instance where that is required. So if a company has engaged with their shareholders, I want to see what they did. If they've got written materials, I want to know who they talked to, who was involved, because those are all things that end up going into the disclosure. If it's a first time for me, which either means a new client or maybe a company that just went public and this is their first CD&A, I won't do this. But generally, if it's a company that's been around, I want to take a look at their prior disclosure. I want to see what they did the previous year, because that, notwithstanding John White's comment way back when the disclosure rules were adopted that everybody should start with a blank sheet every year. A few companies don't. So I just want to know what historically, how have they approached disclosure and how will that affect what I'm doing? And then the last thing is just talking to the folks at the company to understand what the most important issues are for them, the messages that they want to get across in their disclosure. So, for example, if they lost executives or they brought in new executives, I want to make sure that that is highlighted in the disclosure, because everybody today does an executive summary and they start off by saying, here are the most important events that happened in our company in the last year. And if the hiring of a new CEO isn't one of the most important events, then I generally recommend that we make it one. So it's understanding, have you changed the program? Are you planning to change the program? Is there anything we want to preview for shareholders if you're making a significant change? Have you made any commitments to your major shareholders or the proxy advisory firms about what you will or won't do? Let's know those, so going into the process, we can make sure that they're handled appropriately. So other than that, I don't do anything.
So here's a good question. What do you consider to be good disclosure?
Well, for me, good disclosure is disclosure that I can read and understand. I came into this field without a background in executive compensation. And, some incentive programs are pretty complex and sophisticated. And I want to be able to read the disclosure and understand what the company did and why it did it. I think, today the other thing that I focus on is this whole shareholder dialogue, shareholder engagement area. I mean, if you're a company that receives significant opposition to your say on pay or you failed, well, it's expected that you're gonna say something about what you did, and that typically means you're gonna talk about who was involved in your outreach efforts, what you learned, and what you did in response to that. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have changed something just because the shareholders commented on it. But if you haven't, then I think it's important that you explain why your approach seems to make the most sense for your company. Now, you won't always please the proxy advisory firms, but you can make arguments that I think will appeal to your major shareholders that oftentimes will get you through. Good disclosure is disclosure that doesn't repeat itself. I think it's perfectly fine to say one time, we compensate our executives to recruit, motivate, and retain them. I don't think that language has to be repeated 9 times during the CD&A, but sometimes it is. So I look to try to avoid repetition. And the other aspect of that, of course, is CD&A creep or disclosure creep is inevitable. So not repeating yourself when you've explained something clearly helps you to sort of maintain the length of disclosure at something that is manageable and hopefully readable. And then lastly, and this is the thing that kind of goes back to the point I made at the outset, companies have become much more sophisticated on using graphics in order to complement the explanations in their CD&As. So what I look for is, have they used graphics? What's their feeling about spending the time and effort that might be involved in putting together some sophisticated graphics, particularly like a difficult concept. For example, you get a company that decides, well, we've made our comp decisions in December, and now we're going to make them in the first quarter of the next year. And that affects the timing of your awards. And how you explain that to shareholders and to the other people who read the proxy statement can be a little tricky. So we've found that, presenting that in a graphic helps explain what it is you're doing and why you're doing it, and why in one year you may not have an equity award and in another year you may have two. It doesn't mean you've done anything different. It has to do with the fact that your process has shifted. And then the other thing we often see too is with incentive compensation programs, which to me are the heart of the CD&A. It's really important to explain how you have arrived at the metrics that you're using, how they further your business, how the targets have been set. And what we're starting to see are a lot of companies showing year over year changes or trends in their incentive compensation programs. So there's a lot of innovation and creativity out there that I didn't see 5, 6 years ago, but I'm seeing now. And those are the kinds of things I want to share.
So do you have any examples? It sounds, you've given us some examples already of how good disclosure resulted in a good outcome for a client.
Yeah, well, the most obvious one is being able to reverse either a failed say on pay vote or a trending decline in shareholder support. And that, I think, we've had a lot of success, and I think anybody would if you show that you're engaging, if you show that you're listening, if you make the changes or some of the changes, or you're moving towards making the changes that shareholders believe are part of an effective comp program. Those tend to be examples of success stories. I've had very few instances, in fact, I can't even think of any off the top of my head, where we decided to expand our disclosure on engagement and shareholders read it and said, well, this is even worse than I thought. So that's one area. My colleagues here, Hannah Oro, Jid Rosati, who are folks that we hired at Compensia about 10, 12 months ago to focus on governance, have been very effective in helping companies to rewrite their disclosures in order to both address these kind of shareholder engagement issues and also to deal with major changes in the structure of the comp program. There are a few companies out there that don't grant bonuses. And we had an instance recently where a company decided, because it was continuing to get negative reactions from shareholders about the fact that they didn't have a bonus program, implement a bonus program and be able to explain why they hadn't, why they were putting it in now, and how they believed that it really complemented their overall compensation program. So those are the kinds of things that come to mind when I think about being able to draft the disclosure in a way that accomplishes, a sort of a larger objective that the company has.
And what about pitfalls for, what are the real pitfalls that companies should look to avoid when they prepare disclosure, particularly like a non-routine development?
Well, the first thing is, I can tell, and I'm sure you can too, because I'm sure you've looked at enough of these, when somebody is just doing the bare minimum to satisfy item 402. Now, I recognize that in-house people are juggling a lot of balls. I know that their counsel are working on more than just one project at a time, which is often, what I'm doing. So people don't necessarily have the bandwidth or the energy to be able to go and draft a comprehensive disclosure. But I think it's important that they be clear and logical in how their information is being presented. You don't want something where it says one thing at the front and then in the back it says something that's inconsistent or seems to be different. So, I mean, just achieving transparency and kind of consistency through the CD&A in particular will be helpful. I've already mentioned avoiding repetition. A big area for me, and not everybody agrees, and I'm not suggesting that this is the only way you can do it, but when new executives are hired or existing executives leave the company, those are special events. And some companies try to sort of incorporate all those decisions into the discussion of their annual comp review. So even though they brought somebody in and their comp was individually negotiated, and oftentimes in the case of a CEO or CFO, there's some leverage involved in how they come out. That wasn't part of the annual comp review that the company had at the beginning of the year to look at what they were going to pay their executives relative to the competitive market. So I always try to break those out separately and treat them as special events because they are. Not only is the comp different, the reasons why the comp is different, the factors that were considered are different. And I think it just makes the whole document read more smoothly if you don't say, well, we set everybody's comp in January, including the CEO who came in October, because it's just clearly not true. So maybe that's just kind of a personal bugaboo for me is that I try to do things so that they're accurate reflection of what happened during the year. Couple other things, peer group comparisons. There's more of an emphasis today than there was at the beginning on how did you arrive at your peer group? Why are these companies appropriate for you? And we're seeing more extensive disclosure in comparing the financial performance of the peer group against the competitive market or against the company itself, and providing the rationale in the case of picking a company that sort of seems too different than you, but may in fact, for competitive reasons, maybe they hire people similar to you, maybe they're in your same geographic region. Those kinds of things can explain why your peer group has been structured the way it has, which can avoid potential issues with the proxy advisory firms and the shareholders. Post-employment compensation arrangements. It drives me nuts that people put their potential payment disclosure tables in their CD&A. That's not what the CD&A is for. The CD&A is to explain why you do it and why you have the design that you're using. And so I try to nudge clients, and well, I don't see as many now as I used to sort of use the CD&A to explain why do you have severance arrangements? Why do you have change of control arrangements? And not necessarily describe in detail right there what they are. And then the last two things, which are the newest things that we see in disclosure, is item 402X, The this year, companies are having to describe in their CD&A whether there's a relationship between the timing of their option grants and their disclosure of material non-public information. For a lot of companies, that's new. You probably remember back in 2006 when the rules were changed, that the SEC at that time, sort of in the aftermath of the stock option backdating scandal, had suggested that companies disclose what their equity grant practices were. Well, some do, some don't. But this is sort of an opportunity to sort of revisit that issue again. And so I recommend to companies to indicate or to disclose, here's our approach to when we grant equity awards. And yes, of course, we don't take into account material non-public information in timing those arrangements. And then the last thing, unfortunately, not too many companies are going to have to do this, is the compensation recovery disclosure under 402W. I just finished, and I'm going to be writing about this in the next week or so, looking at all the disclosures for since October of last year. And I won't guarantee that I've found them all, but I've found about 60 disclosures where companies had a financial restatement and in fact had to conduct a recovery analysis and determine whether or not any money needed to be clawed back. Now, just to give you a preview, there are about 10 companies that have actually had to recover, but the vast majority of companies have not. And so there are about 50 companies out there that some just say in a single sentence, we have a compensation recovery policy, we had a restatement, nothing to see here. Other companies provide a bit more comprehensive disclosure as to what happened, what their rationale is, which is what the SEC staff has been commenting on in the rare instances where they look at that. So I think that's an area people should be familiar with, but hopefully given the small number of restatements that we see, and then given the even smaller number of companies that end up having to conduct a recovery analysis, and the even smaller number of companies that have to recover, it's not going to be something that, people need to be too concerned about.
Hey, I'm surprised there are as many as 60 though. That's a lot, it seems to me. But I guess this is the first time we're doing this, so this is the new initial baseline.
Yeah, and what I was hoping, and I'm not sure, I think I may have been too optimistic. I mean, the big issue that everyone struggled with and continues to struggle with is, okay, we've got this policy, how do we implement it? And what are the steps that we go through? And I was kind of hoping that maybe companies would describe some of that in their disclosure so that we could begin to get a feel for what are the hoops you have to go through in order to do this. That hasn't happened yet. And given the small number of disclosures, which I imagine will probably continue for a while, it may take a bit longer to piece that together if we're able to do it at all from the disclosures that are there. But on the other hand, it's interesting. One of the issues that people have had because there's no set formula for it is what if you have an incentive plan that is based off of a stock price metric or TSR? How are you supposed to calculate what compensation would have been paid originally had the restatement not occurred? And you have to do what's called an event study. It's basically a probability analysis of what your price could have been. What we're seeing that most companies, and there have only been a handful who've had to do that, generally bring in a valuation firm or somebody to help them validate that their estimate of what their stock price would have been had they not had the restatement is reasonable. So that's something that I think people are going to be interested in what others are doing. And what I'm hoping to do is just to be able to share that information so that it's widely available to people if they wind up in a situation where this is something they have to deal with.
So when I accomplish something that I feel like I did a good job at work, I jump on my bike and ride down to the dime store and get myself a day-old donut. What do you do in terms of getting personal satisfaction? How do you celebrate drafting a good piece of disclosure?
Generally, I buy a book. I like to read. So what I'll do is either go online or, in fact, I try to, to patronize the independent bookstores in the Washington area. So I make it a point, if I haven't been to one for a while, to go and see what's out. And that's typically what I will do where I finished a disclosure. We're kind of at the end of the traditional proxy season now, so things have slowed down a bit, and it'll pick up again, I think, after June 30, and then again in September. So it'll start to get busy. So I might even watch a streaming movie. I'd go to the movies if there was anything to watch, but uh, unfortunately, I'm not really into comic superheroes. So I generally try to find something on my TV that I can relax and see.
You're pretty much in between politics and prose up on Connecticut and then down into DuPont. There's that place,
Kramer.
or Kramer, yeah.
Kramer's. Yeah, I love politics and prose, and I try to go there when I can. But of course, during proxy season, it's pretty busy, so I don't get out all that often. But what I like more than anything else is just to go and kind of browse through a bookstore and see what's out there.
Yeah. And they have great authors that come, obviously, and
Oh
it's
yeah,
nice
yeah,
every night.
we've taken full advantage of their speaking uh, programs because it's nice to be able to go and listen to somebody, particularly in an area that you're interested in or a new area. And I used to see some of my old SEC colleagues there too, so it was an opportunity to, get together and catch up with them.
Nice stuff. Well, great to hear that you're going to be blogging again very soon. And thanks very much for your vast amount of knowledge, Mark. This is awesome.
Brock, thank you very much. And again, thank you for getting me into this. I wouldn't have done it without you. So you deserve a lot of the credit. And as most authors say, I'll take all the blame, but I'll share the credit with
You
you.
did all the work. Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right. Take care.